Adjuncts. Um, well, there's no question that the use of adjuncts is a blight on higher education. I don't know how else to put it. Uh, Originally, of course, the concept behind adjuncts was a good one. There were courses that specific, specialized courses that needed to be taught by people with specialized credentials, and there weren't enough of those courses in a specific subject to justify a full-time load. And the natural solution was to find someone who had expertise outside of academia in that specialized area. Maybe they were a lawyer, maybe they were a doctor, uh, who knows, maybe they were an architect, and have that person come in and lend their expertise to the institution in this very specific, focused way, a single course. So uh, over time, things completely changed. So once institutions realized that they could employ adjuncts for something other than specialized courses, and discovered that they could hire them for general courses that a full-time instructor might ordinarily teach, coupled with the low rate of pay for adjuncts, they discovered that they could save a ton of money. So remember, it's not just the low rate of pay for adjuncts. I saw that once I saw the average rate of pay for an adjunct in the United States was $625 a credit hour. So let's just say, loosely, most adjuncts are getting around $2,000 per course for a 3 credit hour course. And that assumes there's nothing unusual about the course at all. Maybe its size is not that unusual, or it doesn't include anything. There's no lab work. There's nothing outside of the 3 credit hours. And so what happens is that the school pays the $2,000 to a person who's essentially an independent contractor because they're not a full-time employee. The adjunct typically does not receive any benefits. In fact, many schools have a policy about limiting an adjunct's hours, and that's primarily to avoid them being classified as a full-time faculty member or a full-time employee. And so all of the other costs that go along with an employee, the benefits, aren't afforded to adjuncts. So this means that adjuncts are doubly financially beneficial to the institution because they make a lot less money per credit hour than a full-time faculty member, and they also earn either little or no benefits. So adjuncts don't get much. But of course, there's no free lunch, and there are problems inherent in the adjunct structure, and that's why I'm incredibly dubious about the widespread use of adjuncts. I think that if you look at it from the student's point of view, it's obvious that although many adjuncts are very conscientious and work very hard to make themselves available to the students, there's no question that that's not the same as a full-time faculty member who's present on campus full-time. The second thing is that the faculty member's experience, of course, is also fundamentally different. The school is basically employing someone to teach a course and only teach the course. So the faculty member does not have any of the same kinds of experiences that they might have as part of the institution. There's no committee work. There's no there's none of the other stuff that a faculty member would normally be expected to do. So the faculty member's experience as a professional is far less rich. Their experience as a teacher, I would argue, is probably also a little less rich. Adjuncts are very diligent often about trying to create the best possible experience for students. But in the end, that's not the same as interacting with the student in the same way that a full-time faculty member would. And in the same way, that's a different experience for the student. That's probably also a different experience for the adjunct. And so I would say that both from a teaching perspective and more broadly from a professional perspective, the adjunct's experience is fundamentally different than a full-time faculty member's. and certainly, I would say, less desirable or less enjoyable or less professionally rewarding. So really, in the end, what does who's benefiting from this? Uh, if once you stray outside of the courses that require specific expertise, in which you couldn't provide that without an adjunct structure, and so there's obviously a benefit to the student because they wouldn't get that course otherwise. Once you stray outside of that and you're looking at general education, there's no question the student does not benefit from the use of adjuncts. And so, institutions that simultaneously claim to be student-centered and yet make wide use of adjuncts, I'm not sure that those two things go together very well. The institution benefits, as near as I can tell, really only financially. One could argue that there is a small ancillary benefit, which is that because adjuncts have less rights than many full-time faculty, that it is easier to get rid of poor adjunct faculty, and that's true. But at the same time, remember that if you employ someone full-time, you're getting most of their attention, you're getting most of their allegiance. They're certainly not working many other places, as adjuncts often do. And so what you may gain in one way from a human resource practice perspective, you're going to probably lose in other ways. And so I'm not sure that there's a net benefit there. The faculty as a whole lose, because what they lose is a fellow faculty member who is available to participate in shared governance in a robust way. Those people who are adjuncts are not typically able to do that. And so really the only real benefit to the school is financial. And although I agree, the school runs on money, and so you have to figure out how to run the school successfully from a financial standpoint. I would say that the last place to attempt to figure out how to create the most efficient possible process, or the most cost-effective possible process, is at ground zero in the classroom with the direct point of contact between the teacher and the student. Schools are large, complex places where there are many opportunities for cost savings. And what schools do is that they move immediately to the adjunct model because it is so simple to implement compared to other more fundamental institution-wide changes. And because they implement this, typically it's sort of this adjunct creep. They start small and they get bigger. Many people at the institution don't always grasp, as it's happening, what's being lost. Adjuncts have their place. I've been an adjunct myself. I know many adjuncts. They're very diligent teachers. They're very skilled. In most cases, they have the same credentials as their full-time counterparts. But that's not the same as creating the optimal learning environment for the student and the optimal teaching environment for the teacher. And adjuncts, inherently in that system, neither of those two things is created. And so schools who make very wide use of adjuncts, I personally think that they're not taking seriously the educational environment. As the educational environment, the culture of higher education erodes, I think that it has eroded first through the use of adjuncts and then continues to erode through the use of online education as schools are failing essentially, I think, to replicate the campus experience using online instruction. And so I can talk about online at a later time, but I do think that really the widespread use of adjuncts, who are often not shy, by the way, with students or others or the public about how they're being exploited, the widespread use of adjuncts is part of the overall decline of higher education, how people see its value, how people see what the values of the institution are. And so I really do think that schools ought to seriously reconsider their use of adjuncts. If I were able to run a school that made widespread use of adjuncts, I would attempt to convince the school to move to a model that included only the use of adjuncts in specialized subject situations, which was how adjuncts were used originally. They were used effectively, and and everybody understood the value of their use. That's completely changed, and now they're really just seen as a sort of cash cow for institutions, which is not a good reputation for any school to have, especially not a public school, especially not one that's supposed to be putting students first.